Right, last week was a bit busy on silly politics, wasn't it? But while that was happening, on Tuesday, the House of Commons Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Committee published this, all about Brexit and UK energy. Rather important topic, given that energy is the lifeblood of our country, and this report got started in November. Did it appear on the BBC? No, not that I saw. The BBC was far too busy with Diane Abbott misspeaking and saying £300,000 instead of 300 million. But that's what the mainstream media do. They're sucked into the circus of politics rather than discussing some of the really good information that regularly comes through from our civil society into the committees of the Lords and into the committees of the Commons. So here's a new one, and I want to tackle the four big areas from it, which are the internal energy market, the EU emission trading system, Euratom, and then efficiency, as in product efficiency and consumer protection. Now, the overarching summary of the summary is essentially that there were no arguments around UK energy for leaving the EU, not during the referendum, not since. It all works well on the whole, and all of the contributors to the report all said that we want to keep as much as possible and try and stay involved with the policy as far as possible. Okay, part one, the internal energy market. Now, we are connected with the countries around us through gas pipelines and through electricity cables, and increasingly that is important as we add more and more renewables into our energy mix. Winds blow in different places at different times, sun shines in different places and different times. There was a great example given in here of the UK helping out France and the Netherlands when French power stations were struggling, but then later on in the same day, then the flow came back to the UK to catch us at peak consumption time. So this is very important for us. It helps lower energy bills, and it is key to stay involved with that and to stay involved with all of the policies around it. And that was the overwhelming conclusion. Part two, onto the EU emissions trading system. This was set up as a response to Kyoto in order for the EU to keep its obligations. Now, does it work? Well, in theory, this cap and trade system, which means that you've got a cap overall and you lower it over time, but individual companies can buy allowances or sell allowances if they get technologically ahead. In theory, that works brilliantly. In practice, it does work and it does help us hit targets, but it's very much a warts and all deal, and there are problems and criticisms with it. One such thing was there was a overproduction of allowances, and the 2008 crash also dropped some consumption, so the carbon price overall dropped, and that was a problem. The UK tried to fix this unilaterally by having a carbon price floor, so setting a minimum carbon price. The Treasury takes the difference. And that, in recent years, has been increased and seen to squeeze out coal. So it works, but it makes us less competitive relative to the other countries. All of which is to say that it was overwhelming from the contributors to this report that we should stay inside the system, not just because it's a big market and that helps reduce costs and everything, but unilateral fixes aren't good, and we should stay involved in the overall system to make it fairer. On to Euratom. The situation is pretty much like I said about a month ago, which is there is big legal dispute about whether we actually needed to leave. Different lawyers have said different things. It's all about whether you interpret the clause as meaning that Euratom is bound to EU membership, or the terms of EU membership are sort of copy-pasted into Euratom as their own mechanism. The government chose to just leave anyway, and it's quite interesting in this report because it attributes that to Theresa May and her own personal conviction with us having to leave the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. So I quote point 85 here. We are not aware of any substantive arguments in favour of leaving Euratom made either during the referendum campaign or afterwards. This outcome seems to be an unfortunate and perhaps unforeseen consequence of the Prime Minister's decision to leave the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. And then it goes on to say that there was lots of feedback from the R&D community saying that this was all bonkers, that we were being pulled out of it, saying that 2 years is not long enough to set up a plethora of international agreements that need to be struck in order to do what we're doing now. And so there's a real risk that we won't get things together in time, either for our research or for the movement of material and intellectual property and services. So that's very interesting, that actually singles out the Prime Minister's decision, and it's looking here at whether there can be some kind of transition deal in order to extend the time so we've got time enough to fix things. Moving on to efficiency and consumer protection, it says that the EU has been extremely helpful in standards to help reduce emissions from buildings and also lower energy bills. It's done a lot for consumer protection around efficiency standards, and again the overwhelming input from the contributors was that we should keep to this as far as possible because the regulations have been getting things right. And the danger is that if we don't stick with those regulations and have lower standards, if we don't mirror them or if we don't get involved, then the UK could become a dumping ground for less energy efficient products. So the overall conclusion is that we should dodge the bullet of Brexit as far as possible and keep as much as possible of a vibrant working community that we have around European energy.